Thank you very much, distinguished guests, for your patience. I'd like now for all of you to remain seated, but please give a big round of applause to our special guest, Singapore's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Law, Mr. K Shanmugam. Welcome, Minister. And of course, as I mentioned, the Minister will be taking part in our first ministerial dialogue of the day, Building a Connected Asia. And I shall be inviting him up onto the stage very shortly to take part in that discussion. And I should mention the others on that discussion as well. Of course, the chair is none other than Professor Kishore Mahbubani, the Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. And of course, we've got panelists to join him as well, Mr. Vikram Mehta and Professor C. Raja Mohan as well. Now, as soon as the Minister is ready, I'd like to invite him up onto the stage. Thank you very much, Minister. So once again, a round of applause for Singapore's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Law, Mr. K Shanmugam. Please have your seat, sir. Good to see you. And of course, the chair of this debate, Mr. Kishore Mahbubani, and the other gentlemen on the panel as well. Please may I invite you all to come to the stage.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm sure, like me, you are astounded. As you know, when you have a South Asian convention, you never begin on time, but you never begin before time. So clearly, the diaspora is so far ahead of the continent, I can see, in terms of time management. So anyway, we have actually, fortunately, this morning, lots of time, and we need lots of time because we're going to discuss an extremely important subject called Building a Connected Asia. And I actually think that if this panel succeeds, and if it puts forward proposals for connecting Asia very strongly, then it's almost certain that the 21st century will be the Asian century. So you can see a lot rests on the shoulders of this panel today. And for that, of course, that's why we have chosen a very distinguished panel here. You have all the biodatas in the program, so I won't read them out to you. Of course, the Minister himself, Minister Shanmugam, needs no introduction. He's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Law, and of course known to be one of the legal giants of Singapore for many years. Raja Mohan, an old friend of mine, as you know, is from the Observer Foundation in New Delhi, and of course a very well-known geopolitical analyst. And Vikram Mehta, now chairman of Brookings India, also another old friend, also spent many years in Shell, and I suspect may give us some interesting insights into the energy world also this morning. So we've all agreed that we will not make any opening statements. Instead, I would pose some questions. I suggest we do it for about 40 to 45 minutes among ourselves here on the panel, and then, of course, the floor is open. And I always say that it's actually easier for the panelists if you ask difficult questions, because the more difficult the question, the easier it is to answer it. That's a paradox. So think of the most difficult questions you can think of this morning. And of course, I'm going to begin by posing the first question to Minister Shanmugam. And here, even though the subject is building a connected Asia, I thought what we could do is start first with ASEAN and Southeast Asia, because ASEAN actually has announced that connectivity is one of the key goals within ASEAN. They've had various projects and programs to enhance connectivity, from making it easy to travel without visas, to having open skies agreements, and so on and so forth. So it'd be nice to see, to evaluate how far ASEAN has actually gone in terms of delivering connectivity, and then maybe we can build on that, see whether the lessons that maybe South Asia can learn from Southeast Asia in connectivity. And of course, we'll also broaden the discussion and talk about, China, Japan, and the great powers here also, and their impact on connectivity in this region. So we'll be touching on many different dimensions this morning. So Minister, if you don't mind, we'll start with you, and maybe you could give us your thoughts on, having attended so many ASEAN foreign ministers meetings, and now you're part of the ASEAN Brotherhood. How do you think the ASEAN is doing in terms of connectivity?
I think I would say quite well, Kishore. Better than we could have, expected, 10 years ago. But, when you talk about ASEAN connectivity, I would say you need a number of different perspectives. I mean, first, the context in which connectivity takes place. It's not as if the leaders of ASEAN or the foreign ministers of ASEAN sit together, or the transport ministers sit together and say, oh, well, we are going to build more ports, railroads, roads, and we're going to connect all the capitals. It doesn't work that way, because there's got to be an economic logic to it. The time has got to be right. Right? So if you look at today's context, what are the sort of factors that propel this in a almost inexorable way, I would say. First, if you look at the map on the west, we don't look beyond India. You're looking at an economy that's just under $2 trillion, officially at least, growing at, depending on the year, 4 or 5% more, with the potential to grow even more. Then on the eastern side, you look at Japan, which has got renewed vigor and a renewed focus in this region, the third largest economy in the world, and of course China, the second largest economy, which I think is pretty much the key factor and calculus in the economy of this region now. China is now the number 1 or number 2 trading partner of almost every country in ASEAN, and just bear in mind a $7 trillion economy that's growing at 8%, and in a bad year 7%. Then you have Australia to the southeast, again, slightly more than $2 trillion. So you just add up the numbers, and then you have ASEAN in the center, 10 countries of ASEAN with a total GDP of $2.2 trillion, almost the size of Australia and bigger than India. Not a lot of people realize this. 650 million people, $2.2 trillion economy, growing on an average clip of 4 to 5%. Disasters and other issues notwithstanding. So if you look at that, from India's perspective, the private sector has been very active in looking at this region. From an Australian perspective, there is an increasing recognition, and the rhetoric is matching that recognition, that really Australia's commercial fortunes are tied with the growth of East Asia, Southeast Asia. Japan has a huge amount of investments in this region, and China really sees this as a backyard. And so what you're seeing are very clear plans to say link up south of China with the mainland Southeast Asia, north, south, east, west, crisscrossed with railroads, roads, financed by China and constructed by Chinese companies. Ports, airports, also coming through. So within that framework, when we sit in ASEAN and we say, okay, what does ASEAN mean to the people on the ground? And you can talk about ASEAN, but what does it mean for the man in the street? It has to mean easier access. It has got to mean tariffs coming down. Tariffs have come down around 85% by now. And we are hoping that, of course, the last 15% is the most difficult. And we are hoping to do a fair bit within the next 2 years. 2015, come what may, we'll all declare success. And
the ASEAN Economic Community.
ASEAN Economic Community. The slightly more difficult areas like, where can professionals work, what kind of work can you do, that sort of thing is now pretty much being talked about. We will get there in some shape or form, not to everyone's satisfaction, but I think we'll get there. So if you look at that framework, there is a huge economic and social logic to the connectivity. And that is why we can confidently talk about it taking place. It's the economic, it makes economic sense for China, it makes economic sense for Japan, it makes economic sense for Australia to be heavily invested here, and India has seen the potential of linking up its northeast to mainland Southeast Asia and the rest of Southeast Asia through from Assam down to Myanmar. You know, if that comes through and if that takes place, then the connectivity will be taken to a different dimension.
Great. So it's in many ways driven by the fact that ASEAN's geographical position, and it needs to compete with China, Japan, India, gives it a pressure for it to connect.
I wouldn't say compete, I would say the logic actually impels this move, and China is very keen on it. India at the political level, when we talk about it, is very keen on it, and things are taking place on the ground.
Great. So Raja, tell me, you followed the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation, SADC, and if you had to sort of, since you're not a diplomat, you can speak frankly. If you had to compare SADC and ASEAN, how far behind is SADC, you think, in terms of catching up with ASEAN in connectivity?
I think we got a long way to go. I mean, I think there's no denying it. But I think we got to
remember. Why?
Because I think the subcontinent was once fully connected. That it was the partition of the subcontinent which disconnected it. That, in fact, this region was a single market, region was well connected, and it was quite connected to the rest of the world, including to China, to Gulf and various parts. So I think what the partition did was to not only break it up into different countries, but it also break it up into different markets. The second problem was, once we all adopted inward-looking economic policies, so the political partition was complemented by economic partition. So in fact, you could say till 1960s, I mean, the India-Pakistan, India, East Pakistan, India, Bangladesh were quite well connected. It is the logic of the last 30, 40 years and the accumulated burdens of the last few years which has made it more difficult. But I think once South Asia, all of them are today looking outwards. So in some senses, connectivity has become inevitable. The question is, can we do it simply, easily, or going to do it kicking and screaming? Because you can't have a strategy of economic globalization while shunning your neighbors. That is one factor that is driving the region towards a greater connectivity. Second is, I think, the rise of China. China is bringing its roads, its rail networks closer to the subcontinent. It's building a corridor through Pakistan. It's already quite close to completing a pipeline through, it's done the pipeline through Myanmar. They're thinking about railway lines through Myanmar. So in a sense, the Chinese outreach to the Indian Ocean is connecting Western China to the subcontinent by pure logic of the Chinese growth. And then the Japanese are very interested, as you mentioned, in building corridors across Southeast Asia to the subcontinent. So I think the external circumstances are propitious. The logic of economic growth of the subcontinent is right, that you need more connectivity. Now the question is, can we get it right? 2-3 things have happened. For example, India, Pakistan have recently negotiated a trade liberalization agreement, a visa liberalization agreement. Bangladesh and India have recently connected the electricity grids in parts, a part of the country. So I think we're doing right things, but they're small things. But there's a long way to go. But I think if we can leverage from China, from Japan, and what's happening in Southeast Asia, and there is a significant possibility to make the next 20 years very different from the previous 40 years.
But I'm going to ask Vikram and you this same question. I mean, it is not a secret that the most disconnected and the most dangerous border in the world probably is between North Korea and South Korea, but where the level of tension is the highest, of course. But the second most disconnected border in the world is the one between India and Pakistan, where the tensions have gone down. But still, if you look at the number of trucks or trade that goes across, it's almost minimal. Is it conceivable within the next 5 to 10 years, we don't have to aspire to great things, but just to have a normal border between India and Pakistan, where like a normal border between Singapore and Malaysia, or Malaysia and Thailand, where you have border checks and all that, but lots of things come and go across. Is that feasible in the next 5 to 10 years? Is that now something that was probably impossible 20, 30 years ago, but is that feasible today?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one is the problems of South Asia, you're reconnecting, not connecting for the first time, because you broke it up for a particular reason. Now you're trying to reconnect, so that is the issue. Second, I think if you look at last 10 years, I mean, I think considerable progress has been made. There is significant expansion of trade between India and Pakistan.
What is the trade now?
Now I think it's close to $3 billion official trade. And on the other side,
But some of it goes via Dubai, right?
yeah, of course, through Dubai, through Singapore probably. So there is trade that has grown. And if you look at the other borders, for example, I mean, India has given now duty-free access to all the least developed countries in the subcontinent. So Bangladeshi exports to India are growing. So I think once India opens up its market more to its neighbors, which is done already, now the challenge is how do you do trade facilitation? You can improve infrastructure on the borders, improve the visa facilities, bring in that kind of connectivities, then I think we are in a very different realm. So I think the direction has been positive in the last 10 years, but the intensity has not been as good as we wanted.
Good, I'm actually very pleased by your optimistic reply. Vikram, what's your view on it?
Well, at the, you know...
You share his optimism?
In parts, yes, because at the economic level, there's such a complementarity of interests
Within India and Pakistan.
within India and Pakistan that the logic to come closer is compelling. But clearly, we all know that the politics of our subcontinent does not allow for a smooth and stable economic relationship. There will be disruptions. No government in Pakistan can give up its claim on Kashmir, and no government in India can give up Kashmir. I mean, there is just that's not possible in a political setup that has two somewhat weak, democracies. But having said that, if you look at, let's say, a refinery that's 150 miles from the Pakistan border, and there is a refinery in India 150 miles from the Pakistan border, it is generating surplus refining products. It could be sending the product to Lahore, and in the process actually substituting for imports that Pakistan brings into Karachi and then pipes 1,000 kilometers to Lahore. So there is a huge economic logic that could bring these two countries together, supplemented with, of course, cultural and sports and all sorts of other softer sort of exchanges. So to the extent that, there is, as I say, this logic, I'm optimistic. To the extent that politics will always intrude on the logic, one has to be realistic.
Good. Since you mentioned the phrase huge economic logic, and I hope we'll build on that during the discussion, I was going to ask the Minister, one area in which we have done, I think Singapore has done reasonably well, is that we have signed long-term natural gas agreements with our neighbors. And that actually has helped Singapore's economy a great deal. Do you want to say a few words about that, Minister, about how that's helped us become competitive? Because then I'm going to develop that and talk about other gas pipelines, one through Myanmar and the other one, the Iran, Pakistan, India possibility. Yeah.
I would divide that in two questions, Kishore. First, energy security, and then second, the cost of that energy. Signing the long-term contracts was really to secure for a period of time the constant source of supplies. And we had an active diplomacy to do it. We worked closely with our neighbors. It was in their interest, it was in our interest. So we did a lot of things. You have pipes from quite far away bringing in, securing our energy. But our neighbors' economies are growing as well, including Indonesia's, right? Growing at a 6% clip per annum. And their own energy needs have also increased substantially. So in terms of securing constant supply, we've now had to broaden our outlook. We're building a LNG terminal. We are discussing contracts with countries further away. You've got to keep thinking ahead. It's not today's situation. And gas is now a very serious product, and we're talking to a number of countries in the Middle East. So that's the energy security part. The cost equation, of course, has been thrown a little open, a little askew by the fact that you now have shale gas And for the same unit, it costs $3 in the US, whereas the shipped cost in this region is at about $18.
6 and 18.
Between
Wow.
3 and 4 in the US and 15 to 18 here.
Wow.
Right?
That's a huge price differential.
That's not just for us, it's also for the others. And that is one of the things that's, I think, will drive US competitiveness in the next few years. You see a lot more manufacturing going back to the US. The driving factors are the cost of energy. It's come down so substantially. And of course, the fact that the US remains the country where the best and the brightest from all over the world go to. And third, as a result of that, the innovation that goes on, I think has made the US pretty formidable right now. So I'm sorry to put a slight question mark on your primary thesis about the decline of the West, but I think
I already spoke about the Asian century. I didn't use the phrase decline of the West.
I needed
I was trying to behave myself today.
I needed to step on your toes a little bit, Kishore. But you know, earlier this year I was in Turkey. I see the Turkish ambassador here. They asked me about the US and the West, and I quoted them something that is attributed to Bismarck, that there's a strange providence that looks after drunkards, orphans, and the United States of America. So just when you think that, you know, they're down, they're bouncing back up, despite you know, some issues of governance. But I would say, you are saying 45 minutes for us to discuss ourselves. I see a lot of people in the audience, and maybe we should be a little bit more democratic and open it up to the audience as well.
Because we have 1 hour 50 minutes, 1 hour 40 minutes. So I'm just going to follow up with your comment, because Vikram Mehta and I were discussing it before you came, Minister, about the impact of shale gas on the region.
Right.
And you were saying, Vikram, that now that Qatar can no longer export as much gas, the United States is looking for markets in Asia, and that there will be greater connectivity, which is the theme of our panel today, between the Middle East and Asia as a result.
We raised it with the US when the Prime Minister made an official visit to the United States. We raised it and we said we would be very happy to receive gas from the US.
And will they be selling to us?
Well, I think at the end of the day, money knows no nationality.
Vikram, do you agree with that?
Yes, let me just build on what the Minister said. I mean, the fact of the matter is that our region, the Asian subcontinent, with some exceptions, face a very similar energy problem. Demand is surging, supply is struggling to keep pace with demand, and our environment is under stress. Now, there is no one silver bullet that's going to solve our energy problem. We have to approach this problem in many different ways. But the shale revolution in the US does offer, on paper at least, the possibility for the Asian continent and for countries in Asia to come together to collaborate on how they want to challenge the, let's say, the cartel of the producer countries. Today, a lot of oil and gas is sold into East Asia or into the Asian continent at a premium to the price that is sold into the Western markets.
Why is that so?
That's a long. I can give the answer, but let me just finish my train of thought here for a moment. And now, as the Minister said, the gas market in the US is between $3 and $4. The gas price in Europe is between $6 to $8. But gas flowing into India and into Japan is oil indexed, and it lands at between $14 and $18 a million BTU. So there is one real possibility here is that, let's say, if the countries like Japan, China, India, and in others got together and challenged this hegemony, you might say, or the cartel of the producers, we might be able to actually shave off some part of the premium. Now, it's an issue that won't be resolved overnight, because every country has its own national self-interest at stake, and every country chalks out its own particular path. But I know that, for instance, India and Japan have just announced, for instance, or they did announce in September, the possibility of talking to each other about such a collaboration. The reason why there is this possibility is because countries like Qatar, which had built up facilities in order to serve the US market, are now having to rebalance their trading routes and look for markets in the East. Because the US has had the fastest rate of oil and gas production of any country in the world over the last 5 years. US is today the largest producer of liquids, if you include biofuels, in the world. It produces more than Saudi Arabia, 14.5 million barrels a day or something. It is going to convert most of its LNG import terminals that were set up on its coastline in order to receive gas, the regasification terminals, into export terminals, because it has now got surplus of gas. So here we have a real opportunity. So these are sort of the issues that could supplement the physical infrastructure connectivity that we're already talking about. Like the minister said, we're building, or I think we're talking about building a road network from India's northeast to Myanmar, which could conceivably go as far as Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam. We have talked in the past about a gas pipeline grid, that connects the Asian continent. These are real possibilities, which I think we must talk about if we want to build a connected Asia.
Yeah. I'll throw in one more, not a qualification, but point to that. China has huge reserves of shale gas. Though it is said that technologically it's a little bit more challenging to access it compared with US. But technology always will overcome these issues.
Yeah. Talking of gas, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, Raja, India and Myanmar were in deep talks about exploiting some new gas find off the coast of Myanmar. And originally it was supposed to go to India, but because of the difficulty of building a pipeline across the Bangladesh waters, that project got aborted. And at the end of the day, that gas that was meant for India went to China instead. And the Chinese completed that deal in record time. Not only that, they completed the deal in a few months, and they completed the pipeline also in a record. So what happened down there? Why was India so far behind?
No, I think the issue of bringing it into India through Burma, through Bangladesh, when it got into all kinds of troubles. But I think the fact is yet that India still owns stakes in those fields. And I see some of them here. Some of the Indian companies have actually participated in the construction of the China Burma pipeline. So I think what we're going to see is oil is fungible, gas is fungible. Companies are going to participate. So none of this is going to be a single national project. I think in the past, India's ability to negotiate trans-border pipeline projects has failed because of the difficulties it has with its neighbors. But I think today, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, all of us are looking outwards and saying that, look, we need to find ways of securing our energy. So if there is a little more political will, and hopefully the diaspora community from outside will bring some pressure on them, the political leaders, because they become one of the biggest donors to the political parties as well. So there is something I think all of you can do, that if you put the right kind of, bring to bear the right kind of pressures, that you can facilitate trans-border projects. For example, India, Pakistan and Afghanistan have actually negotiated for all the other difficulties on Kashmir, whatever you have, actually a trans-border, the TAPI pipeline, that is pipe bringing gas from Turkmenistan down into India. So while it's got one or two glitches still to be sorted out in terms of price and other issues, but the fact that India, Pakistan and Afghanistan, not all of them have good relations with each other, that they can actually sit down and negotiate this arrangement. And then we have the Iran-India-Pakistan pipeline. Then we have future pipelines. In fact, the Chinese are talking about bringing some gas into India. So I think there are different possibilities. I think the trick is actually, how do you bring the corporate and the diaspora and the public pressure to say, look, here is what we need. How do we push the political process forward to make sure these things happen?
Yeah, I think we spent a lot of time and energy unexpectedly, but it's a very good subject. But maybe we'll spend 5 minutes or so on issues like political and cultural connectivity in this region and what you see as the challenges, and then in 5 minutes' time we'll throw the floor open for questions from all of you. So, Minister, what's your sense about the directions of political connectivity, especially within ASEAN with 2015 coming up, and what are the sort of, the EU, as you know, has got this very ambitious goals. How ambitious can ASEAN be?
I suppose you would suggest the EU as a perfect model for integration.
I'm just asking whether it's ever been discussed within ASEAN.
Well, I think we learn from...
Now you're being skeptical about the West.
Not at all. I was going to say we learn from the best. The EU example tells us what to do and what not to do. I think, I started off my comments by saying that there was a huge economic logic that propels us towards connectivity. I'm a believer that in all these things, the leaders in the different countries, politicians alone, can't say, well, this should happen and it will happen. There has to be a framework where the conditions are right. And if you look at Europe, having gone through several centuries of the Westphalian model of statehood, nationhood, and then several wars killing each other, 2 world wars, and with a broadly similar culture, similar religion, same religion pretty much. And it was, I think the conditions were right to form a closer integrated community. And even then the project started in the early 50s, and you would say it became much more integrated in the 90s and 2000s. And perhaps looking at the integration, they moved faster in some areas and didn't move fast in others, and that then created some economic issues. Each one said that they are entitled to borrow at German rates of borrowing costs based on German productivity, but each country was not as productive as Germany. And the central banks and the banking systems were not subject to central supervision. So that's what I mean. If you look at Southeast Asia, coming out of Vietnam War, you look at us, first the cultural similarity is not the same as Europe. It's very different. You move from Myanmar north to Indonesia in the south, whether you look at language, whether you look at religion, whether you look at how we look, what are key issues for us, how our societies are structured, we are different societies. And you cannot pressure cook that integration. It's got to take its own pace over a much longer period, I think. And the levels of economic development. I mean, if you look at Singapore, of course we are small, but with per capita, GDP per capita at above 60,000 US. And then you look at some other countries at a much different level. So I think physical connectivity makes a lot of sense. Economic connectivity makes a lot of sense because we trade with each other, we do things with each other, and everybody's lives improves. When it comes to political systems, judicial systems, many other countries are still finding their feet, building up the institutions that are necessary to create, even within their own countries, the right framework for democracy, for rule of law to be sustained. You look at a country like Cambodia, after a long period of trouble, is slowly beginning to find its feet in the last 10, 15, 20 years. So I wouldn't rush it. I would say these things will take time, take their own pace, and we do what is doable. That's my view.
Great. But looking at the South Asian region, I mean, as you know, there have been ups and downs in terms of the level of political closeness, and now seems to be a relatively good patch. Am I right or wrong? How would you describe it?
No, there's enough bad news from South Asia always, so it's never going to be as good as we want it. But I think generally I would say on the economic side, I think the direction has been good because post India's own opening up of its market, then we've had the trade liberalization agreements we negotiated with Pakistan. I would say the focus, really the challenging areas are actually visa liberalization, where you make it easier for people to move. India, for example, is now debating a significant visa liberalization in relation to boosting its tourism. I mean, when you're broke, you want to do things which will make it easier for people to come. So that pressure is, I think there's going to be some expansion of visa-free arrival, etc. But I think we need to expand that within the region itself. I mean, we have negotiated a visa liberalization agreement for businessmen with Pakistan. That's a good step. But I think there's a lot more that needs to be done because of the concerns about terrorism, etc. There is the hesitation in the security establishments. But the logic of economic integration demands you need to have more open borders. You need to be able to move people, facilitate people's movement. I would say one area where there is actually huge potential for breakthrough is in religious tourism. Which is something, the spiritual
religious tourism.
Yeah, because thanks to partition, I mean, I think you've gone them distributed the holy shrines of Hindus and Sikhs on both sides, Muslim shrines in India. People want to travel. So if we can find a way, learn from Southeast Asia and the Chinese and say, look, can we do group tourism so that that reduces the burdens of individual policing? Can we move people across the Punjab border, those who want to visit the Sikh shrines? Can we make it easier for pilgrims from Pakistan to visit Ajmer Sharif in Rajasthan? And then there is this huge, I think, of the Buddhist circuit in the subcontinent, from Afghanistan to Myanmar, from Tibet to Sri Lanka. There is the huge number of Buddhist sites, which not only people of the subcontinent, but of Southeast Asia, of East Asia, from Japan to China to everyone wants to visit. So if you can, way in which you can build around religious tourism, create rules, that keeps the security wallas happy, but ensures people can travel, then I think we're looking at a huge potential that has commercial implications, boost tourism and increase revenues of everyone, and restore the badly neglected, hundreds of badly neglected monuments in the subcontinent. So I think it's a win-win solution if you can focus on religious tourism, organize in groups across Asia. Then you connect South Asia to itself and to Asia as well.
But did Vikram, when you see this, apparently there's a Google ad that has gone viral in India about how some daughter or granddaughter reconnects her father with the sweet shop in Pakistan. Tell us a bit about that. What's that ad about?
It's a great ad, I know, if you see it, but it's not as easy as Google makes it out. I mean, Google is advertising for how you can connect or find addresses. That's all fine. I mean, but I think...
But it's gone viral, right?
Yeah, it's gone. I mean, I think it's got a lot of columns. People are criticizing it, like, as always, what Google does comes in for much criticism as well. But I think it captures one idea that, look, there are people thirsting for contact.
Yeah, both sides.
Yeah, it's not, it shows the Punjab part of it, but there are hundreds and millions of people in UP, in Bihar, who actually, this is not partition loss. I mean, people who say, look, you're reconnecting after 60 years. I mean, there are people who got marriages across, people have relatives across. The trouble they go through today to get visas. I mean, how badly we treat our own people to meet the relatives across. So I think that's where we need to bring in even more changes. I mean, we don't need Google for that. The problem is in the political, in the mindset, the security mindset today, that you've got to find ways of making it easier for travel without creating security complications. So I think there we need some innovative approach where you make it easier for people to move. That's why when I said you do group tourism, where like the Chinese, I mean, are a close society, they want to make sure what comes in is secure. So you can actually find ways of organizing this in a better way and makes it a business proposition. Like Google, it's a business proposition. There is so much business that can actually be done if you make it easier for people to move across borders in the subcontinent.
So Vikram,
can I Kishore, intervene? Going back to the earlier point about religious tourism that Raja made. In these conferences, we talk about the potential, the framework, what's possible. But earlier this year, I visited Patna, went to Nalanda, where Singapore plays some role. Take one step back. Here you have Nalanda University.
Do you want to explain to everyone just very quickly what the Nalanda project is? Maybe not everyone has heard about it.
Well, most people must know what Nalanda is about, even if they don't know about the project. But it's really to revive the ancient university in some spirit and make that as a jewel of a project which as India's contribution to the EAS, East Asian Summit. But really, here you have a university that was a seed of learning, great seed of learning, so long ago, well before any of the famous universities in the West had been established. And you see the buildings, there's, you can make it come alive. If you look at East Asia, Southeast Asia, Buddhism is huge, and the spending ability is huge as well. If you look at Thailand, if you look at South Korea, you look at Japan, you look at China, I can easily envision 10 million tourists within a short period going to Patna. Why has it not happened? Is it that we don't know what to do? Is it that we don't know how to do it? You need to be able to fly into Patna, you need to be able to stay in good hotels, you need the transport, comes back to infrastructure, and beyond conferences, and I'm sure at every conference on South Asia, this point has been made, getting things done on the ground.
Great. Vikram, anything to add on that dimension before we go to the floor?
Well, I mean, I think the minister is absolutely right. I think most of us who live in India despair about the absence and inadequacy of our infrastructure on a daily basis. And all of us ask the same question, why is it that we are not able to actually address this issue when the solutions are known to us, when there is indeed also no lack of finance. Maybe the government may have financial pressures, but frankly, if we had the right model, the financing could be arranged, when there is international interest. So we are all concerned. But I think we have to put that aside for the moment and ask the more fundamental question. What is the underlying sort of challenge between, or the tension between our society and our state? Our society today, as everyone I think will appreciate, is a vibrant society. It's an entrepreneurial society. It's dynamic. It's actually the society that has given us the kind of growth that we've seen from 2003 to 2010. And it is the society that will give us growth, in my personal view, again, the same level in the coming years. We do have a state, however, which is still cautious, which is still hesitant, which is still closed to entrepreneurialism and new ideas. It's a state that's still shackled to precedent and the past, even now. But having said that, Minister, let me also say that we have to caveat the concept of state. India is no longer run out of Delhi. India is run by Delhi, by state governments. We are a truly federal society, by city governments, and indeed there's an emergence of civic society, which is also challenging the concept of governance. So for anyone to actually argue that we will continue to stay the course, that there will be we will not be able to solve some of the problems that we have, all of us accepted are real problems, I think is not appreciating the nuances of the nature of the relationships that are emerging in our society and the nature of the relationships that are emerging between our society and the various facets of our state. And so I agree we have a problem. But I think, Minister,
I didn't say you have a problem.
No, we do. We have a problem, and I think there'll be very many people in this room who will accept that we have a real problem. We should have those 10 million people come into Patna. There's no doubt about that. And more than that, we should have more and more people. We have fewer tourists in India than I think, fewer hotel rooms in India, all of India, than Singapore has.
Fewer tourists as well.
And fewer tourists as well. Why is that? So the fact of the matter is, but if you look ahead, I think my own view is that the whole idea and the concept of governance is going to shift in a more productive way because of this emergence of a dynamic and vibrant and entrepreneurial society. And that's one reason why, looking forward, some of the challenges that you're talking about will indeed get addressed.
We are strong supporters of a dynamic India and have been encouraging India to play a more active strategic role in EAS and summits, and also a number of ways in which its economy can be structured to really participate in the growth of East Asia. So that's good to hear.
It's a hope. So.
Just a quick follow-up question on civil society. You're right. One of India's strengths is civil society. Is Indian civil society connecting across the borders with Pakistan civil society or Bangladesh civil society?
Yes, at different levels, at many different levels. I mean, I know that there have been groups of people who have actually gone across the border and had behind channels, or what we call behind the scenes kind of conversations with governments on how they can reconfigure the nature of the relationships. Business confederations have had several meetings, and of course sports and cultural organizations. So there is we have, as Raja said, I mean, not just between India and Pakistan, because we were one entity, we were one geography, but within the Asian continent, we have historic, civilizational, and very ancient common roots.
Yeah.
That does not mean that, again, that we are not driven now by nationalisms. We're not driven by self-interest, and that one shouldn't sort of assume that because we share some values and norms which are ancient, that we are going to be able to connect each other on the back of culture and on the back of our past. And the same is in Pakistan. We just can't assume that we will be able to connect because of that. Politics has now driven a wedge, and that's the problem. But there is a lot of contact. I went to college when I was at university in England. My classmates, and then subsequently great friends actually, was Benazir Bhutto and Imran Khan. And they were friends of mine even when in the university, but when they were both in politics. That said, whenever I used to go to Pakistan, Benazir was Prime Minister, I was on the board of Pakistan Shell, she would never see me. Because
you took it very personally, right?
No, I didn't take it personally. I mean, she never saw me because she could not admit to relationships, friendships. No, sorry.
That's what they call a Freudian slip.
Friendships that... No, there was only, this is a truly, genuinely a good friend, and before any of the press starts to sort of get... But the fact of the matter is, we have lots of common relationships, and those need to be built on, and that's the basis, again, of optimism and hope.
Yeah. Just say one thing. Sure. I think one is the civil society interaction across borders. I mean, India-Pakistan has been the most difficult case, but the rest of South Asian borders are fairly open. I mean, India and Nepal have an open border. There's much more contact today between India and Bangladesh. Sri Lanka, of course, is pretty outward looking. I think that's where the diaspora comes in again. Yeah. I think there is actually growing contact within the region. But I think the links within the South Asian diaspora groups, between themselves, and how they can, because in each country there is a significant factor, that together they can contribute to pushing new ideas of bringing people together and promoting connectivity in the subcontinent.
Yeah, well, actually, this is a very appropriate time to join the diaspora in the conversation. But I'm glad that both of you made two very important points, Vikram, about the ancient historical links across Asia that I think will be one of the great things that will happen is the reconnection of all the ancient historical links. And of course, the diaspora, you're absolutely right. Later this afternoon, when we are launching the McKinsey book on India, in my essay, I point out that if you go into the trading rooms of all the major banks, whether it's Citibank or Deutsche Bank, you see Indians and Pakistanis working closely together with no effort at all, no difficulty at all. So clearly, why is it that they can work so well outside the subcontinent, but when you go to Pakistan, the Prime Minister can't see you? That's the disconnect over there. So now let's open the floor for questions, comments. Please, Piyush, I can see, and then Atul. Then the rest can please, if they can raise the lights a bit, I might be able. Can you pass the microphone over here, please, in front here? Who's got the microphone? Yeah. Okay, Piyush, over to you.
Hi, my name is Piyush Gupta from DBS Bank. My question's about China, India, Chindia. It was interesting to me, we spoke a lot about a connected Asia. It seems to me that the China-India connectivity is extremely important in getting the vibrancy of a connected Asia. Now we talk about fractious relationships. The China-India relationship has been fractious. And even today, the popular narrative is more about competition, actually distrust, perhaps even more than competition, certainly in India and I think also in China. So my question actually to both Raja and Vikram is, do you see this changing at the ground level, the society level, let alone a state level? And then my question to the minister is, harder one, is there a role that a Singapore or B, the diaspora can play in trying to help bridge a trust deficit and really try to figure how you can get some of the obvious resource surpluses in China to play a role in the development of India and the subcontinent?
Okay, so I'll start with Raja and Vikram, then I'll come to you, Minister. Yeah. So,
But I think the traditional narrative of India-China relationship has been a fractious one. But I think the story of the last decade has been the dramatic expansion of economic cooperation. Of course, that brings in its own set of issues in terms of fair trade, balance, all those things. But the fact is, today the Chinese presence in the Indian market, I think, despite all the security concerns, has significantly expanded. For example, in the telecom sector, in the power sector, Chinese companies.
Huawei.
Huawei, Americans won't let Huawei to do things in the American market, which is probably more open than the Indian one, but they have a pretty active center in India. So while the political differences remain, I think the logic of economic growth, I think, will bring India and China closer on a number of areas. And I think here, I would see in the future, and I think while there will be difficulties on a range of issues, the importance for India of the Chinese market and for the Chinese of the Indian market will demand a greater engagement and greater cooperation. And during a Prime Minister's visit to China recently, it was agreed that...
Three weeks ago, right?
Yeah, I think it was October, or early November. So essentially saying, look, we're going to create special zones for investment by the Chinese. We're now looking at connectivity, for example, one issue that came up on how do we do Bangladesh, India, China, Myanmar border, can we begin to look at joint projects which can expand connectivity within the region. So I think there are new ideas that are beginning to come. My sense is, as long as we can keep the political trouble under reasonable control, I don't see it being solved in the near future, there is enough space on the economic side, on the infrastructure side, on the transborder side. And I would go one step ahead and say, look, let's leverage the Chinese capacity to do projects to actually force greater integration in the subcontinent. If the Chinese are going to do a project in Myanmar, why is it that we can't connect up? Like in Nepal, the idea that, look, India and China can work together, bring railways in, do projects together. Chinese can build power projects in the region, which will have to export power to the subcontinent. There are many possibilities. I think if there is more openness on the economic side, and I see some of that beginning to happen in Delhi, you're going to see a lot more possibilities for India-China cooperation, not just for India-China, but something that will benefit the whole subcontinent and not merely India.
Vikram, anything to add?
No, I agree with one qualification, and maybe it's a major qualification, and that is that the trade balance between the two countries is imbalanced. Rather, that China has a much stronger position in India.
China exports more than
China
India.
exports more than India does. And this has actually impacted a lot of Indian industry. And there is concern, especially amongst companies that are involved with infrastructure, whether it's power generation, that Chinese are capturing the market, and unfairly so. Now, whether that's indeed the case or not, but I think the debate is now on as to the pros and cons of an open trading system vis-a-vis a more protectionist approach. And it's not something that's discussed openly and widely, but within the boardrooms of companies that are involved with companies in sectors that are competing with Chinese imports, there's a lot of concern.
Minister, Singapore's role.
Specific to the question of what role Singapore can play, I think it's like an ant trying to balance two elephants. We had someone who could play that role. Mr. Lee could go and was an interlocutor between the United States and China, was instrumental in bringing China into the World Trading Organization system. Not a lot of people realize this. and who could go to Beijing and say what he thought, would go to Delhi and say what he thought, had the charisma and the gravitas, and was taken seriously, and could go to Washington and say what he thought, and would be taken very seriously. I recall 2005, he went to Delhi, he made a series of, I would say, somewhat undiplomatic statements, and one of the things I remember he said was to India, look, this corridor that you're talking about between Delhi and Mumbai, why don't you bring the Japanese in? They're waiting to come in, billions of dollars. You just got to fix these, some few things in, and they will come in. I see it now happening. But you know, he could say things like that. And I hope that in that context, what Vikram has said comes through in terms of the role that the private sector and civil society will play in propelling the further changes. Specifically, the role that we have played and which we think we can continue to play is to, you know, with ASEAN at the center, we have created, you know, this, Kishore, a series of international platforms. You have the ARF, you have the EAS. We were instrumental in bringing India into EAS. Why did we do that? It's useful for countries to be able to sit together at the same platform and to be able to talk about regional issues and their own issues. So India, China, the US, they are sitting at the platform. It's good. Why are we involved in Nalanda? It's India's contribution to EAS had to be, you know, catalyzed, and we felt we had a role in trying to do that. And that way, India can play a role in terms of how it integrates and interacts with East Asia. So there are these things that we can do. Some of them, I think strategically, if you talk about building a EAS platform with India and China and all the others, is strategically quite significant. Some of them, like other things we do, are more ground level stuff. But at the end of the day, between India and China, the operative imperatives are going to be what both Raja and Vikram have pointed out, the level of trust. Economically, India has to feel more secure and more confident. And until India feels more confident and more secure, you are going to have debates within India. I think today in India, it probably feels less secure economically, also less secure militarily, because China is well ahead in all the indices of power. And as long as there is that perceived and real or perceived, in this case probably real and perceived imbalance, I think it's going to take serious efforts between the two of them to build a bridge of trust.
Great. Right. Just as a small footnote, Piyush, our school, the Lee Kuan Yew School, actually has raised an $8 million endowment on which we get a 4% return of what, $220,000 a year, just to focus on research on China and India. So we're trying to play a small role also in that area.
See, Kishore, I would think, you know, making our own South Asian jokes in Singapore, people in think tanks, politics and so on tend to be Malayalis, tend to be the odd Tamils, some Bengalis, and so on. Kishore, contrary to his DNA, being a Sindhi, made the mistake of joining public service very early. But I see that he hasn't lost completely the DNA, because each time I see him now, he talks about the endowment, how much money he's going to raise, what interest rates.
You see, this is why the Lee Kuan Yew School is the third best endowed school in the entire world. It's run by Sindhi.
But 20 years ago, when I would talk to Kishore, he would say, you know, I'm the stupid Sindhi, the only one who joined the public service, and the poorest Sindhi around.
Poorest Sindhi running a rich school. Atul.
Hello, my name is Atul Punj. I chair a company called Punj Lloyd. My question is to all the thinkers on the panel, that there are some things that concern me, and one of them could possibly be rooted in having too much of a education system in India. Because the sense I get is the intellectual arrogance coupled with intellectual paranoia, coupled with the suspicious mindset of those in power in the government, is leading to a lot of the obstacles that we find ourselves facing in India on a daily basis. There's a lot of debate. Everybody knows what needs to be done. There is almost zero delivery. And whatever starts moving, there are other interested factions, whether in the private or the public sector or in the government, that tend to hold us back. So we seem to be really working against our own self-interest on a regular, ongoing basis, which is almost like clockwork. We move 5 steps ahead, we move 4 steps back. When do you think the government or those in authority will start saying, we are 134th in the World Bank rankings of ease of doing business. Let us shoot for coming in the top 50, in the top 25. Make it easy, allow people, trust people, let them move ahead and get on with the job. Because the sense I get as an Indian who's 80% outside India, 20% in India is, we know the answers, everybody agrees with you, but the common refrain is you need to have patience when you're in India. And my response to them is, why? Why do we have to become fatalistic? Is it the old Hindu way that we've just been brought up to believe? When do you think India is going to be seized of what we really need to do and get on with the job so that we can move ahead in our own country and in our neighborhood? Because when we're able to do that is when we'll really be able to stand up globally with our head high.
I think that qualifies as a very difficult question. Raja, then Vikram. Vikram, you want to start first or Raja go first? You know, when you call Raja or King, you got to go first.
I think the last few years have been pretty bad. I mean, I think there's no denying that the expectations generated in the first term of the UPA government,
in terms of government performance,
and the general growth of India, there was an expectation both at home and abroad. Things were going to continuously improve, and I think what we've seen in the last few years is a setback, is a rollback in many ways. But there's something good about crises, that just as the prospect of hanging concentrates your mind, the prospects of being downgraded by credit rating agencies has forced the present government in Delhi to take up some measures. Then Pakistan is not in great shape either. Bangladesh has its own problems. So across the board today, there is a moment where, after 20 years after reform and liberalization, there is a logjam across the board. So I think, but the pressures today to do something, like you've seen in what this government has tried to do in the last few months, whichever government comes to power in Delhi, in whichever form it is, whatever the coalition that comes, the first task for them is going to be unleashing some economic potential, that doing exactly the kind of things you said. I mean, you can't change everything overnight, but my sense is the task for the new government in Delhi is going to be absolutely to push that story back into that, look, India is on the right trajectory, things will improve, to generate those perceptions. My sense is you have to wait for 6 months, whatever happens in the next, when the new government comes.
Who's going to win?
I mean, that's a difficult question, even more difficult question. But it's too early to tell. But the fact is, I think the pressure on India, on Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and on the region to do things differently is going to be generated from within itself. I think this is a good moment where don't expect the moon, but the ability to bring some pressure from outside, especially by the business community. And I'll just say one thing about business groups. The tragedy of the last 20 years as India opened up on the business side is the big companies have lobbied for themselves. Now, what is the tragedy of the subcontinent is that the bourgeoisie, or shall we say, the capitalist class, has not collectively pressed for reforms that benefit everyone. It is each one pushing for himself, each one undercutting the other. So unless the financial capital, the business capital begins to say, look, there needs for some rules, some ways of fundamental change, rather than winning specific contracts for each one. And I think that's where we need the business groups to get together and say, look, we need policy changes, offer policy advocacy, rather than merely doing their own personal, individual, corporate lobbying.
Vikram?
Well,
You've been in the corporate sector, so you know what it's like.
Yeah, the difficult question, so therefore an easy answer in some senses. I mean, Atul, you yourself, you raised the question, but I think you know the answer to your own question. It's not going to be easy to respond as to how long, when will the government actually make a difference. The fact of the matter is, I think we need to ask the question differently. What are we talking about? What do we mean when we say government? Do we mean the central government in Delhi? Do we mean the various state governments across 28 states? Do we mean local governments? Do we mean the Panchayati Raj? Now, if we actually sliced and became much more granular about the concept, as I said earlier, of the state, I think we would be able to counter some of the obvious, problems that we have encountered over the last 3 years with some quite serious cases of success. And the question that we have to ask ourselves, which is, I think, more fundamental, is, are the fundamentals of our economy, are the fundamentals of our polity still intact, despite 3 years of having taken a blunderbuss to our foot? Are they still intact? Do we still have the prospect of returning our economy to the trajectory of growth? My own view is yes, we do. The fundamentals are very intact, are strongly intact. We have a youthful population that is entrepreneurial. Our savings rate are close to 30% plus. We are going to leapfrog the technological frontier. We have many examples of industry that are world-class, that have reconfigured and reorganized and are world-class and are competitive against world companies. What we have lacked over the last 3 years is governance. Governance in Delhi and maybe governance across some of the other states. But as I say, we do have examples in the states of innovation, of decisiveness, and we have examples where we can actually look at best practice. So, will we actually implement the solutions that every one of us knows? We won't implement it radically. That's not in the nature of our democracy. But we will implement it incrementally. And incremental means we will take one step forward in the right direction, which will lay the basis for a much larger stride in the same direction. And that, I think, is what we all have to work towards. And as I alluded to earlier, this will happen because society at every level is going to challenge the lack of governance. It's going to force governance to measure up to the task. So the next 6 months are going to be a period of uncertainty. Let's be clear about that. No one should expect any reforms. No one should expect that the new government is going to do anything other than perhaps hold the finances, and the Finance Minister of India will be speaking next, and I think he'll make that very clear.
But we'll ask him that question.
But beyond that, unless we actually end up with a government that's totally fractious and doesn't last more than 6 months or 9 months, I think we can really expect ourselves to go incrementally in the right direction. Don't smile. I know you're pessimistic, but this is my hope. And you better believe it too.
Anything to add, Minister?
No, not on this topic.
Okay. Please, over there, the gentleman, yes, please, first. Go ahead, raise your, if you don't mind, identify yourself for the panel. Microphone over there, please.
I'm Surya from the Institute of South Asian Studies. Maybe we could go back to the big picture Asia, and Minister Shanmugam has eloquently outlined how ASEAN has taken India on board in several multilateral organizations like East Asia Summit and ARF. Both these are really multilateral organizations, but ASEAN also has a All Asia multilateral forum, namely the APT, that is the ASEAN +3. Why is it that APT refuses to accept India as a member? Maybe the minister could give an official answer, and maybe Dean Kishore can give an independent answer. Thank you.
You want me to disagree with the minister?
You are saying why does ASEAN plus APT refuses to take India on? I didn't know that India asked to become a member of ASEAN +3. But going back to your earlier point that, about Singapore putting India onto all these platforms, it's not quite the accurate way of putting it. We were one of the people who felt that would be good, and we played some role. Ultimately, India had to want to come in, and others had to agree, and a number of countries played a role. But we had always been one of those who felt that India could and should play a more significant role in this region, and have been encouraging and have done what we can. I mean, that's the highest I would put Singapore's role at? You know, I will give you a direct and honest answer, and not just an official answer. I think if you were to go around the countries to see which countries are most enthusiastic about free trade agreements, I don't think India will rank among the top. Let's be direct. So to talk about ASEAN plus 3 is a stretch when we are still talking about further trade agreement between ASEAN and India. Let's get that sorted out. Let's get our economic partnership between Singapore and India. We have been talking several rounds. Let's get that sorted out, you know. So we mustn't allow the rhetoric and the vision to run too far ahead of the reality. ASEAN plus 3 combines the three economies, the major economies, Japan, South Korea, and China with ASEAN. We have, in the spirit of inclusiveness, tried to bring in India in what we call the Comprehensive Economic Partnership for East Asia, or Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership now, which has an inclusive architecture where all the ASEAN plus 3, ASEAN, the plus 3, Australia, India, all are welcome. And I think the jury is out as to how quickly India will fit into that scheme. So the ball is in India's court.
Okay, gentleman in front of, please go ahead, yes. Microphone, please. The microphones are coming. Oh, then we'll go to the gentleman at the back there, sorry.
I always
no, come to the front first, come to the front, and then we'll come to you.
That's very interesting.
Thank you. My name is Eric Manis from the World Bank in Washington. When you started talking about connecting Asia, I thought perhaps you might touch on information technology. And I'd like to mention the point that, you know, we have a new revolution in the internet which can bypass many of the points, political points that were made today, the dichotomy between government and people and the like. But whereas Singapore has 100% usage of the internet, India has 7%, Sri Lanka has 12%, Pakistan has 18%. So how can we, why is that? Is it infrastructure? Is it literacy? Is it the lack of adoption? So without the internet in South Asia, how can we see connectivity take a future?
Vikram, you'll start with you.
I'm no expert, so let me just give you my response, which others may wish to challenge. But clearly, the problem is not receptivity. We move, today 700 million people have the mobile phone in India. And that's risen from 50 million in 2000 to 700. So it's a huge increase. The problem is clearly infrastructure. We haven't invested enough in broadband, in infrastructure to be able to connect everyone. I think maybe, and Raja, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe the problem also lies in the nature of our policy and the discontinuities in our policy regime. But technology does offer the possibility, the prospect of relationships without mediation, as you're pointing out. And so clearly this technology, internet, and just connectivity, communication revolution as such, will be the basis for for building bridges across the region. That cannot be sort of denied. When do we actually do that is a question mark.
Raja, nothing to add? Okay. But that's also why I mentioned the Google ad as an example of how it's crossing borders. Gentleman over there with the microphone. Can I just, before you, can I get a sense, are there questions at the other side that I'm not seeing? Okay, one over there. Two. Okay, then I'll come to both of you then. Okay, please, yes.
Thank you, Professor. My question is...
Can you identify yourself, please?
Yeah, sorry. My name is Baburaj Pillai from Arohi Asset Management. I have a question which I want the panel to address, but specifically I would love to hear Minister's view as well as Professor Mahbubani's view. Minister, you spoke about shale gas making US energy independent. And there is a school of thought which believes that when US becomes energy independent, it will disengage itself from Middle East and probably from Asia as well. What do you think is your view on that? And second part of the same question is, if US decides to disengage from Asia, will it become an impediment for a better connected Asia, or will it become an accelerator of a connected Asia?
Again, splitting that into two parts. In terms of US energy security, and it's not just shale gas in the US. If you go to Canada and you look at the resources available in Canada, in terms of the oil that's potentially available from sand, from shale, natural carbon deposits, and then Mexico, I think you're looking at a US which is going to be completely energy secure for a very long time, for any period of time that is relevant for us to assess. Does the second part of your question therefore necessarily follow that a US that is no longer dependent on oil from the Middle East will therefore be less engaged from the rest of Asia? The US has always had a streak within it of isolationism. People wanting to say we have two oceans on either side, we are safe, why do we need to get engaged? You had those debates in the run up to the Second World War. You have had those debates continuing. So that's neither here nor there. Again, I think the logic of the situation would require the US to assess that it cannot pull back for a number of reasons. One, economically, can you afford to be away from regions of the world, South America, which is growing at a fast clip, Asia, China with its booming market, India with its huge potential, and in my own view, a likely trajectory of growth, Southeast Asia, Australia. Can the US and its companies afford to be out? Not something that's often known, but the US companies in Singapore, given our rule of law environment, make more money than they make anywhere else in Southeast Asia. But imagine the potential if they exploited it to the full in Southeast Asia, in East Asia. So I think the economic logic will be quite clear and require US to be engaged. And the security logic as well. Somebody mentioned IT just now, but beyond IT, in a globalized world, you cannot any longer be secure within your own borders. If you want to be secure, you need to be engaged with the world. And in many ways, physical military security cannot be guaranteed if you are not also present in the different areas of the world. And the high seas, which are vital for US growth and vital for US trade, the commons, the international commons, the US is the only country still able to make sure there is peace and order in those areas. So there are very many compelling reasons for the US to be involved. If you talk to almost any person of any influence in the international policy arena, in the strategic arena, in the think tanks, this is not even a question that they would consider relevant, because the answer is so self-evident. That having been said, is there a growing sense within the US that the debt problems and other problems are caused by the engagement with the rest of the world and they should just pull back? There is certainly that. There is certainly a mood against free trade. There are all these currents. That's the nature of American democracy. But I believe that ultimately the national interest would be brought home to the people of the United States.
I just want to add that I agree with the Minister, but I think the debate that is going on today in Washington, D.C. is a phenomenal debate. And I'm actually watching with tenterhooks, as they say, to see the outcome of the negotiations with Iran. This has been the fiercest most divisive debate in Washington, D.C. in a long time. It's almost like a civil war that is being fought out. And I think nobody knows what's going to be the outcome of that debate. It's incredibly fierce.
The whole Western Hemisphere, actually across the board, is becoming a major producer of oil, and that is going to transform the geopolitics. But unfortunately not for us. The fact is, in East Asia and South Asia, our dependence on the Gulf can only grow. Yeah. So as that grows, I think we need to, one is the premium, Asian premium, etc. But the other is, look, how do Asian countries, do we collaborate to make energy security work for us in a different way? I mean, I think that's a big challenge, where there are possibilities for India, China, Japan cooperation. The other is more important, I think, in a group like this, the diaspora group. The Gulf as a region where the subcontinent's diaspora is one of the most weightiest, most active, but that doesn't often figure in overall calculations. I mean, if you add all the South Asians, Indians, Pakistanis, and Bangladeshis, and Nepalese, I mean, I think you're close to 10 million Indians live in the Gulf, 10 million South Asians live in the Gulf. And Dubai is virtually a South Asian city in many forms. The linkages are already formed, but the energy structure where Indian dependence, South Asian dependence on the Gulf is going to increase. So I would say there's some way we can imagine this forum can also bring in Persian Gulf. I know Singapore does a lot with the Gulf, but can we imagine something where the Diaspora Convention begins to look at the Gulf as a critical area where we can leverage cooperation within South Asia and between South Asia and East Asia to promote energy security for Asia as a whole?
Great. I think I saw a hand over here. Am I correct? Yes, please. And then a hand over somewhere over there. That's right. So now there are more coming up. Oh, someone's got a microphone there. But okay, we'll come to you in a minute, Mr. Jumaboy, right? Am I correct? Yes, yes. Please.
Thank you. Danish Sultan from PAC Marine Services. I have a question for Mr. Chopra. We briefly touched on Kashmir, and basically Pakistan and India can't let loose on their positions, which they have on Kashmir, and clearly that position is something which they cannot negotiate or come to a solution. Do you see a scope in freezing the Kashmir issue for 100 years, getting the people and economies connected, and then coming back to this issue 100 years later to see if it really works? The other thing is about the same issue that India has always stressed that it's a bilateral issue and should be discussed within bilateral means between India and Pakistan. And clearly this is not moving forward. Is there now a time that we should look into third party as a mediator on this issue? And would ASEAN or Singapore be one of the countries which could play a role in this? Thank you.
Okay, that also qualifies as a very difficult question. Vikram.
Therefore, the answer is very easy. I'm going to pass it on to Raja.
You were the one who said that.
or to Ambassador Saran, who's sitting in the front row. I know.
There's so many experts in this room.
I know. I'm not an expert on this. I have a view, but I think it would be totally wrong for me to try to express it when I have people like Raja sitting.
I would advise...
So Raja, just suggest a quick 5-minute solution.
2 minutes. I would advise Singapore or anybody in the world to not to go down that road.
Not to touch Kashmir. Yeah.
Because the Kashmir issue is littered with any number of mediators who kind of put their hand in and come a cropper. So that's not, if you're looking for a winning business model, I mean, I would say this is certainly not one. Much like Tibet, same with Kashmir. I would say large countries, they're a bit of a problem, but I would say any attempt at outside mediation by the UN, if it has failed from the UN and the US, I don't think anybody else is going to be able to help out there. But I would say, look, there are some political problems will exist. But I think as a group of people across the region, I mean, let's not go on, because to tell the politicians, look, let's do the hardest problem first. I think our role, our contribution must be that, look, while differences exist, what is it that we can do in the interim? That can we do more business? Now, today, I think, in fact, the fact is, India and Pakistan have negotiated on Kashmir, but this Prime Minister has negotiated with Pakistan. Any amount of negotiation has gone on within a bilateral framework. So our job is not to find those silver bullets for enduring problems, but to say within the political difficulties, how do we circumvent those? How do we create economic, political, and other cooperation where it is possible? So I would say the focus must be not on the most difficult problem, but on areas where actually we can make progress.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I mean, I actually suggested that if you look at the relationship between China and Taiwan, which is a very difficult relationship, they focus on increasing the trade interdependence, economic interdependence, and say, let's worry about the other issues. So there are various models you can use to put aside the most difficult issues and focus on developing closer relations. So, Mr. Jumaboy, sorry, I didn't see you. Please, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much. Building anything needs bricks. So the first thing to do, and I'm referring this to the problems in India, is to make those bricks of administration strong and work. Number two is the pathetic state of the judicial system. It would take the court approximately 466 years to clear the backlog or dependency in the Delhi courts. This is Delhi Chief Justice A.P. Shah in 2011. That is the other important thing. And whenever we make agreements that are cleared by the government, something pops up from the ground to stop it from going on. 30 years ago, we were going to do the Madras corridor. I've just read in the papers that it is now going to take place. So there has to be a cleanup within the administrative system, and that again refers to the political system. These are the things that I hope the next elections would clear. But between that time and now, it would be a very good thing if the current political leaders start this immediately. They may get a better chance of being re-elected. Thank you very much. Oh, incidentally, Pakistan and India. A few years ago, I wrote a small booklet on business relationships between the two countries. I was given a tremendous reception in Karachi by everybody, including the stock exchange and the merchants and the press, etc. And the same enthusiasm in India. It still hasn't taken place. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, I said maybe, Vikram, a short answer on your part, and then, because I think we've got to come back to the focus on connectivity, because if we delve into the internal challenges that the countries face, I suspect there'll be other sessions on that. So let's, for now, focus on connectivity. A short answer from you, and then we can move on. That's another question over there. Oh, sorry, Viswa, sorry.
The short answer is, of course, we are concerned about the erosion of the institutions of governance. So it's the bureaucracy, the judiciary, the legislature. There's no doubt about it that over the past few years, these institutions have got hollowed out, and we are actually not even sure sometimes where power resides, who in fact is wielding the levers of power. That is a major, major problem to resolve. Those will indeed be the foundations for sustained growth. The institutions, however, do exist. So it's not as if we have to build afresh. We have to strengthen, or we have to reinforce the weak, or we have to reverse the weakening and reinforce the foundations. That's really what it is, what we have to do. And I think, again, I go back to my simple statement that one must look forward with optimism.
Okay, Viswa, let's get back to connectivity, since you're Mr. Connectivity.
Hello, I'm Vishwa. Globalization clearly results in both centrifugal and centripetal forces, right? Now, my question is there a role for the diaspora in helping to motivate or stimulate or provoke greater improvement? Does does the diaspora have a role in improving the situation in South Asia, or is it impotent?
Okay, that's a good question. You want to start, Raja?
I think we are meeting.
I think everyone can make a small contribution.
I think we are meeting here on the assumption there is a role, and that role can only grow because, as the Deputy Prime Minister said in the morning, the weight of the subcontinent's diaspora is growing, its economic might is growing, and its influence on world politics will continue to grow. So I would say that must be our starting point, that can the diaspora make a difference both in terms of national development, because diaspora is not merely outsiders sending in their money in, but it's been a bridge between the subcontinent and the rest of the world. The subcontinent closed itself, turned inward, did not make progress. The idea is that it is a bridge on which outside influences, the positive ones, have come into the subcontinent. I mean, besides the party donations, of course, that's a different story. But the fact is that this is our bridge, this is our, shall we say, the brains abroad, which can facilitate the transformation, both in terms of ideas, in terms of money, and above all, I think, because let's not forget, this is a meeting of the subcontinent as a whole, that the subcontinent's diaspora, by working together, can actually produce transformation in terms of the cooperation within the subcontinent.
Okay, quick responses, and then I've just been told that we have to wrap up. So after we respond to Visva, can we just, if you don't mind, think of one or two closing things you want to say before we close the session. So please go ahead, Vikram.
The intellectual capital of India must be harnessed to the intellectual capital of the diaspora. And as Anand Mahendra actually wrote in his chapter in the book, McKinsey book, he says, let's talk about not just foreign direct investment, let's talk about foreign direct ideas, or let's talk the foreign direct flow of ideas. And I think that's where the diaspora and Indian intellectual capital can come together to address some of the issues that we have talked about today, like energy. And how do we actually solve the problems of distributed energy, for example? How do we harness technology for breaking or weakening the link between economic growth, energy demand, and environmental degradation? These are some of the challenges that we can indeed, I think, overcome if we harness the talent that's available to us across the diaspora.
Minister, anything you add on diaspora?
I would say this is one of those questions which are difficult to answer in the sense that the answer is so obvious. I mean, it's there. You take at any field, economic, finance, business, you take industry. You have Indians growing up in a small village in India and winning the Nobel Prizes or Nobel Prize from a university in the West. And that then regenerates enthusiasm for that field and for the ideas back in India, with a certain degree of pride. In so many different ways. That's one way. It's in a sort of visionary way, that somebody that you can emulate. But in terms of the flow of ideas, Indians come out, they do well outside, they go back, they have connections in the interconnected world. Whether you look at the US, you look at the West, you look at Southeast Asia, you look at the Indian families all around, thriving in business, thriving in industry, thriving everywhere, and with deep connections back to India. It's such a self-evident point. And obviously these ideas then energize the growth in India. And likewise, with the first-class companies and industries that you have in India, despite some deficits in infrastructure and so on, you have tremendous industrial potential in India that's looking for footholds in various parts of the world and doing quite successfully. So this globalized world has actually allowed the Indian talent, both inside and outside, to fuse together and inevitably generates ideas not just for the benefit of India, but also for the benefit of the world.
Great. So quick closing comments, Raja, Vikram, and then the Minister, on what's your overall picture on connectivity?
I think in the morning, when Ambassador Pillai started by saying that, look, we're going back, we're reimagining some of the concepts of how we think about the region. That's why we're calling it South Asian diaspora. In a sense, I think we got to think of the region as a whole. There is the Indian diaspora, there is the Bangladeshi diaspora, there is the Pakistani diaspora. But I think there is also sub-national diasporas that are developing. The Bihar Chief Minister recently organized a Bihari diaspora. So there is a room at the subnational level. But I think our task is to imagine as a collective that how can we all together, that is the diaspora groups abroad from each of the 8 countries, can we reimagine the region? Can we think of the region as a whole? Can we produce those connectivities? And can we contribute as a collective to the transformation of the region as a whole? For that, I think this forum, I think, is exclusively poised to promote the collective consciousness of the region. Probably one of the most exciting regions in the world. It has difficulties, but it's also probably one of the most ancient civilizations of the world. Bringing that together, I think, is the challenge of this forum.
Vikram?
Asia is a geographic expression that I think the West must have coined some decades back. It looks very different for a person sitting in Mumbai to a person sitting in China. So whilst we do have common sort of, in some senses, historic and civilization roots, we cannot ignore that we are driven, as I said, by nationalisms and by self sort of interest. So what can be the basis for connecting Asia? And I think that the basis for connecting Asia has to be to identify the complementarity of interests that run through our very diverse, kaleidoscopically diverse and divergent interests in some senses. And what are those complementarity of interests? Well, we have talked about some, like energy is indeed a complementary interest. Physical infrastructure is, connectivity, IT, people-to-people exchange, scientific and research exchanges. These are the issues that culture, these are the issues that we need to focus on in order to build a connected Asia.
Minister?
Very quickly, Kishore, I will say it will happen, it cannot be stopped simply because there are so many forces that are driving it. And it's possible, there are 2 parts to it. It's possible today to be in this conference in the morning, be in South India this afternoon, be deep in the village by this evening, and be back in Singapore tomorrow evening. Likewise, one can be in southern China this afternoon. So it is possible. Second, with the IT and video technology that you have available, the connectivity is there. Next, the forces that compel it. Economic, Indians want to come out, they want to do things here. Asians want to do things there. So many compelling forces, huge number of forces that drive it. So both the motivation is there, the physical ability to do it is there, and therefore it will happen.
Well, I must say that's
acceleration from what it is today.
Yeah. I must say that's a wonderful note on which to end this session, because when the session began, I actually was not sure whether I would end up feeling pessimistic or optimistic after these discussions. I've ended up feeling actually very optimistic that despite all the problems that we've been discussing, the momentum, I think, towards greater connectivity is there. And as the Minister said, it's being driven by many, many different forces. So with that, now please join me in thanking the panelists for a remarkable session that we have had.
Thank you again to our special guest, the Minister, the Chair, and our wonderful panelists. Wasn't that a stimulating discussion? A big round of applause, please.